This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Xcast. As ever, the truth is in here. I'm your host for this episode, Carl Sweeney, and thanks very much for joining us for this discussion all about the 6th episode of the 5th season, which, of course, is Christmas Carol. An episode written by Vince Gilligan, John Shiban and Frank Spotnitz, directed by Peter Markle, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Chris Knowles for this episode. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
Yeah, and we're going out appropriately close to the festive season, or during Advent, just before Christmas. Are you a big Christmas guy, Chris, or is it not really your scene? What do you think of this time of year?
Well, I am, but it's always a lot of work for me. So, it's not really very restful. Because, the kids all come over and I've got to make supper and, I'll make Christmas Eve dinner and then I'll make brunch and then I'll make dinner. It's a lot of work.
Sounds like an ordeal, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as we shall discuss, Agent Scully has a disrupted Christmas too. In this episode, which first aired in 1997, December the 7th. And, well, before we get to Christmas Carol, actually, I think this is the first time we've spoken to you for season 5, isn't it, for these episodes? So, would the 5th season be right up there for you in terms of favourite seasons? How highly do you rate it?
Oh, I rate this season extremely highly. I think it's an almost perfect season of television. Mm. If you just took the voiceovers out of Redux, you would have, I think you would have absolute perfection. I'm just dying for somebody to do a remix of that episode without the, purple prose, H.P. Lovecraft internal monologues that they just rankle. And they're so unnecessary, too. I think that would have been a really cool, spooky, creepy episode if, he's just walking around without all this stuff going on. If you just had all these montages with Scully doing her science and Mulder sort of wandering around without all that stuff. But anyway, I think this is a quintessential series of television. It kind of ruined me for television for quite some time afterwards. No, it really did. It's just so perfect, and everything was working and humming and gelling, and great guest stars this season. We had some guest writers. Just a phenomenal episode. This is a phenomenal episode, but a phenomenal season of television, and it's almost like it was so good that it's almost like you have nowhere to go but down after this point, because it's just so essential. This 5th season is really just this is the peak, really is, for this series for me.
Yeah, well, and this episode, because I think you've said to me in the past this is one of your absolute favourites, and you've already described it as phenomenal. So yeah, marks out of 10 that I'm assuming is a pure 10.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, what do you make of Christmas Carol overall then?
Oh, it's my favorite episode of The X-Files.
Yep.
I know that's probably seems a little strange to some people, but there are a number of reasons that we can discuss about that. But I love this episode to death, and I just it hit me at the right time, it hit me in the right mood, and it just devastated me. It really it wiped me out. It was just so perfect.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, really, was, have you always felt this way? Because for me, this has been one that I've grown to appreciate a lot more over the years. I probably would say an 8 out of 10 myself, but I think it's really good. But at the time, I think I felt a vague sense of disappointment because this came, I think, the VHS with Emily. I saw it before it aired on British TV, but they just didn't really flow. I mean, we'll talk about how they match up together, but yeah, seeing it in isolation, though, its virtues are much more apparent, I think.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, let's see, this is 1998. 97, I'm sorry.
End of 97, yeah.
Yeah, I'm 31 years old. I've got 2 kids. My oldest is 10 and my youngest is 5. I'm spending a lot of time jetting back and forth to New England to visit my family. There's a lot of military in my family, so I can sort of relate to the Scully family, and the family dynamic was very, very familiar to me. Especially, those withering looks that Mama Scully gives her kids, It's just the whole setting and dynamic really hit me at the right point in my life, I guess. And again, I'm older than a lot of fans, and I'm certainly older than you. Mm-hmm. And I had a little bit more living under my belt, and I just really appreciated that they really delved more into the family, Scully's family, and her background and her backstory. And I really wish that they did more episodes like this. I wish they did more episodes that went into their backstory, that went into their childhood. That for instance.
Yep.
So we saw the Samantha abduction scenes, right? Mm-hmm. But I really would have liked to seen some episodes where you see how this affects the family. That you get a little bit more background, you get a little bit more rendering as to how the Mulder family was just wiped out by this event, and how it affected Mulder, maybe how it affected him in school, maybe when he came to start being interested in the X-Files and all these sort of paranormal things. I just think they could have fleshed that out a lot more, and I really wish they did. And maybe they were planning to, and then, some of the fans didn't react very well to this episode, so maybe they sort of scuttled that. But I really would have liked to have seen more of that, and I really appreciate it because, Chris Carter has always said it's only as scary as it's real. But when Mulder and Scully are sort of operating in this universe unto themselves, that's not reality. They're gonna have families. We know they have families. They're gonna have lives. They're gonna have people that they interact with, and to just have it be this weird isolation where they wander around alone, in deserted cities and investigate these things, it just doesn't. In hindsight, as the years go by, you kind of see that as like, I wish they had fleshed that out a bit more. I really do.
Yeah, because after this two-parter, we see Mrs. Scully from time to time, but it's really nice here, isn't it, to see like Bill and Tara, and just to get a sense of what their lives are a little bit like, and I think we do lose something, don't we? Kind of losing track of some of these characters. Well,
I'll tell you what else. One of the great things that I loved about the early season, particularly season 1, is that you just were constantly reminded that everyone thought Mulder was a lunatic. Everyone thought he was just destroying his career. Mm-hmm. You had people explicitly telling him that. Everyone thought he was just off on some weird side street that he was just getting lost down. And that gave the characters more... it places them more in context. So in this episode, and in the episodes that sort of follow before this, Thinking Gethsemane and the Redux episodes, mm-hmm. you get a sense of like how much Scully has been changed by working with Mulder, how much she's been changed by her abduction, how much she's been changed by doing all these strange things off in weird corners of America. And you really get the sense that the Scully family is just like, what are you doing with your life? It's like, why are you following this guy around? He's going to lead you off a cliff. And, I know a lot of fans hated Bill, but to me, Bill is the voice of sweet reason. He's just like in a real world context, he would go, you were on the fast track to become a doctor. You decided to join the FBI, Your career was going gangbusters until you hooked up with this weirdo, and he's just like some psychotic who's just chasing phantoms, and he's going to lead you, straight to your death, which we saw in Redux. So I think that he is undervalued because what he is presenting, and I think what really renders her character so well, and why I appreciate this episode, is that he's offering like a real world context to Scully. That Scully is a woman who has basically lapsed into someone else's psychotic delusions and has been, damaged by it. And we see that. We see that in this episode where she's very withdrawn and she's very cold and she's very tense. And I just, Gillian Anderson had criticized herself for this acting job, and I just think, like, what are you talking about? This is perfect, It's perfect for where Scully's at this point in her life. It's perfect for, her dealing with her family, and even though it's more devastating that they aren't saying what they think, it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until Bill really gets in on her, that we see this family dynamic, and she's just like, she's supposed to be at luncheons, and she's off, at jail cells, and just the whole thing. I just, that's really what I appreciate about this episode. And again, I wish they did more of this, is that it just puts these characters back into a recognizable real world that you and I would, have some sort of context for. And I think it just really renders her character in a way that I don't think you would see in just more isolated standalones or even mythology episodes.
That's what I was thinking as I was watching earlier, actually, is that I can see exactly where Mrs. Scully is coming from. I can see exactly where Bill's coming from. I can kind of understand what Tara's thinking as well. And I thought, yes, I think that was very well done. Just before we move on, I thought it was kind of interesting that, I mean, as so many episodes were, apparently this was really written against the clock, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. I think Spotnitz has talked about they had an original conception of the story, then it changed to incorporate Melissa Scully. It was supposed to be much closer to the Dickens story that the episode's title suggests, wasn't it? So that's kind of tantalising to wonder how exactly that would have played out.
It would have been horrible. I mean, how could you really do that? I mean, I guess you could have Melissa show up in ghost form, which of course she does, but I just, I just don't see that. I just don't see that working. I think that was a very wise decision, and I think the way they pay tribute to the classic Dickens story without doing a cover version of it in the X-Files universe, I think really worked well. And it just goes to show. I mean, you had 3 writers on this story under the gun, really motivated. They were on fire, these guys. I mean, the X-Files is at the peak of its popularity. It just gives you a momentum that you wouldn't have in another context. You certainly wouldn't have today, when everything, I was like seeing, these shows that they spend tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on, and they get like 1 million viewers, per episode, if not less, like things on HBO will get like anywhere from 600,000, 800,000 viewers, and on average, and it's just like, whoa. So you can't underestimate just the power and the inspiration and the motivation that the kind of success and being at the center of the cultural conversation is going to give you.
I guess it's an interesting shift though, isn't it? Because like at this time it would have all been about the audience share and, getting as much of the mass audience as possible. But I guess these days it's more about attracting new subscribers and things, isn't it? To whatever service it may be. It seems more important than the total number, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I got to tell you, I just don't see how the economic model makes sense, personally. I mean, when you've got television programs on average costing, $3 to $5, sometimes up to $10 million per episode, and they just not get, even with paid subscribers, even with streaming, even with downloads, even with, people buying versions on Amazon or on iTunes or something. I just don't see the economics of it. It doesn't make any sense to me, and really just makes me wonder how this whole system continues to float. I think a lot of it is like venture capital money. I've heard a lot of things about, like, for instance, Netflix, that Netflix just doesn't make any money and they lose enormous amounts of money. So I don't know. I think that we're due. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a major shakeout, because a lot of what's keeping all these streaming channels alive with all these incredibly expensive shows is, it's speculation. It's venture capital. And I think once the results are in and, these people are losing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, it's just, they're going to have to pull the plug, and we'll be a much different landscape.
Anyway, so in terms of fan reaction, you've already suggested this is not typically regarded as a fan favourite, but it has a respectable 7.9 out of 10 on IMDb, which renders it, that puts it 14th for the season, equal 14th, I think.
Well, it's pretty low in a 20 episode season.
It is, but it's a good season, like we said. There's not that many episodes people would point to as being particularly weak, is there? What, it'd be like Schizogeny is the one people always seem to point to, isn't it? But
which I like. I like it. I mean, it's got Sarah Jane Redmond, and how bad can it be?
And it's very atmospheric, isn't it? Anyway, we digress. Let's take a closer look then at Christmas Carol. Yeah, the first thing I wanted to put to you was, because the episode starts, doesn't it, with the tableau, the manger, the parallel with the virgin birth and so on. And I saw this quote from Spotnitz where he said that was very deliberate, of course, and it links to the rest of the story. And what he said was this: it's a Christmas story and those parallels deepen the story we were telling. So I was just wondering, what you think? Like, how much do you think the Christmas setting really kind of adds to this, and how much is it kind of incidental?
Oh, I think it's, crucial.
Yeah.
I don't think you could tell a story with this kind of power in another time, or Thanksgiving or Halloween or whatever, because it's like, yeah. It's a time that's supposed to be for family when, you come back home and, you lick your wounds at home, there's that power, but also the subtext of, when Mrs. Sim there, commits suicide, that's also something that's very common at that time, that's referenced directly. A lot of people check themselves out around Christmas time. I just think that the power that, really it focuses your attention in a way that any other setting or time would not. So I think that, it's perfect. And it just gives it such tremendous power in my estimation.
Yeah, and I think what makes it work especially well is because we know that Scully's family is a religious family, don't we? And we've all seen other stories set during Advent where, the Christmas setting is just a trapping, it's kind of divorced from religion. But here we can assume that Christmas means a lot to this particular family, can't we, given what we know of them?
Well, yeah, certainly. I think that, because we saw just in the previous myth arc, we saw, the father, what's his face?
McHugh, yeah.
McHugh show up at dinner and show up at the hospital. So, Scully sort of reconnects with that, which, is perfectly consistent for a character like her at that point in time, at that time period. So I think it just works really well. And again, it does give it more heft than if it was just a secular family who, wouldn't even go to church on Christmas Eve,
And also because we remember what happened with Scully's father in season 1, of course, Beyond the Sea. And there's just that sense of loss running through it, isn't there? Because, this house that they're in is the same layout as their old house. Mrs. Scully talks about missing, or she's thinking about Scully's dad and Melissa.
Yeah, and how much she misses them, yeah.
Yeah. And we get the phone call, of course, Melissa's voice, that although it's not commented on immediately, which leads Scully to the crime scene where we meet Kresge. And, we discover that a woman has been found dead in an apparent suicide. And it's outside, isn't it, when Scully tells Bill that she felt the call sounded a lot like Melissa. So what do you make of this opening? And yeah, I mean, it is a nice low-key way to do a kind of ghostly intervention, though, isn't it? This kind of unnerving phone call. Like you say, it's much better than seeing Melissa in kind of a Dickens homage, I think.
Well, And look at it this way too. I mean, would Scully go to that house if she didn't recognize that, this is the voice of her dead sister? She'd be just like, what is this, some kind of crank? I mean, who is this person? Where am I supposed to go? Is this a trap? I mean, just the fact that it is her sister and she recognizes it as her sister drives her to visit this crime scene. So I think that I think that's really powerful. I really do. Because it starts, it starts off, the last time we had a Christmas story on the X-Files is, what you just referred to, where, her father dies. So we're already, I think subconsciously at least, we're already kind of on alert because we know what happened the last time they said a story at Christmas. So we're just getting ready for things to happen. And, that visitation, through what they call electronic voice phenomena, sending her to the Sims house. Yeah, it just really, it grabs your attention right away. It really does, or at least it grabs mine. And I think if fans are older now and, some of them have families of their own. If they go back and watch this episode, I think their appreciation of it will really deepen, with that kind of hindsight.
Yeah, well, that's my experience, having just turned 33 a couple of weeks ago and having 2 kids of my own. Whereas this, as a younger person, this didn't do much for me, but I really enjoy it now. And you've already mentioned Gillian Anderson's performance, and we spend a lot of time in this episode just kind of looking at her, don't we? Like when it picks up after the credits, the titles, we see her at in the crime scene just in kind of quiet contemplation. So as you've already alluded to, it's kind of striking that she had problems with her own performance, isn't it? So she said she felt she was a little low energy, a little too melancholy. It was hard to find the right attitude for Scully. So what do you think's going on there? Just the case of the person who's done the performance is not the best arbiter of it, I suppose, of how good it is.
Well, she's in the moment, and, the character is supposed to be feeling low energy and melancholy. Yeah. So, I mean, mission accomplished. I mean, how else is she supposed to feel? So, it's one of these things that it's always harder to sort of have that kind of objective view of your own work. And, but, I think her performance is perfect. It's pitch perfect at every given moment. And, it's what the story calls for. I really believe that.
She's incredible, I think, especially in this episode. Well, in both of them, but I think here is obviously the more, the episode is better than the second part, as we'll talk about. We first see Emily and her father, and there's kind of an interesting thing here, isn't there, where this isn't the Emily we were originally intended to see, but this actress, Lauren Dywald, was kind of brought in. So what exactly happened there?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. So they shot this entire episode with another actress, a young girl, and I think she was a bit. Lauren Dywald, I believe, was 6 at the time, and they shot this with an actress who I think was a little bit younger, and so they shot all of this episode, and then they get to the scenes in Emily where she's got to go into the MRI machine.
Oh yeah,
and she just freaks out. The actress, the girl, just freaks out, and would not calm down. They just could not get her to calm down. I guess Bob Goodwin said she doesn't want to play anymore. And it was really, it was crunch time. I mean, I think this episode that, we're speaking of now, it really delivered like at the very last minute because they had to reshoot all these scenes, and most of them had to be reshot with Scully's double, who I guess would be, at this point, Arlene Pileggi. Was she doubling at that point in time?
Sounds plausible, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it was Arlene Pileggi that was doubling for her. So all these scenes had to be reshot, and then what they had to do was that the scenes that they couldn't reshoot, particularly the scene when Mr. Sim is carrying Emily while talking to Detective Kresge, they had to sort of paint different clothes on, and there was all sorts of digital magic that needed to be done, and sort of took them right up to the bell. So that is really amazing too. And it's just, it's one thing after another, because not only did you have this incredibly motivated production team in LA, but you had just like these incredible people up in Vancouver who were just, and Chris Carter has spoken about this so often, how much he really appreciated and how they were always up to any challenge, and they had this incredible work ethic, and they really wanted to do something so they could put Vancouver on the map, which, I think the X-Files did. Mm-hmm. So, it's just this confluence of all these factors that, that feed into, a show like this that has to be rewritten at the last minute and has to be reshot at the last minute and still comes out the way this episode came out, which, I don't think you'd see a lot before this, and I don't see a lot after this, personally.
Yeah. I mean, at the outset, the case, in Kresge's view at least, it's looking straightforward. There's no need for Scully to be involved, but obviously she doesn't accept that. And she's obviously very preoccupied because there's that scene where she's at the dinner table, she kind of excuses herself, calls Mulder but doesn't speak to him. So yeah, the extent of David Duchovny's involvement is, one shot, essentially. I mean, it would have been a very different episode with Mulder on the scene, wouldn't it? I think, obviously, the second part kind of shows that as well. But, it's kind of curious that it is so limited, isn't it?
Well, I think it gives it more power because she's kind of isolated on her own, and she's dealing with what she clearly recognizes as paranormal phenomena, and she doesn't have Mulder to sort of guide her through it. So she's, she's kind of like lost in the forest a bit here. And I think that gives you a bit of a hint of what we would see in season 8 and season 9. And, Kresge is, I think, sort of a prototype, or like alpha testing for what we would later see with John Doggett. So the fact that he's just not even skeptical, he's just like, why are you bothering with this? There's nothing going on here. There's nothing you need to look at. So I think that plays really well. And I really have to say, I mean, I really thought that John Piper Ferguson had really good chemistry with Gillian Anderson. Yeah. I mean, I thought they worked really well together. And I think, you don't have like a skeptic believer dynamic so much as you have like an oblivious dynamic and like a confused skeptic. So it's like, even more, it's even more shaded and a little bit more fractal. So I really appreciate that. And, you're right. It would not have worked the same without, or with Mulder. And, as you said before, the Emily, which is an episode I know a lot of people don't like at all, which I've really come to appreciate recently, actually doing a rewatch for this talk here. So I've come to appreciate it much more than I had. So, I think that the interplay between Scully and Kresge, really makes this episode and would not have been there otherwise.
When you say a prototype, though, do you mean like this actor potentially getting a beefier role in the future, or this character, or just this type of dynamic? Or just they were trying something different, or exactly how conscious do you think they were playing around with it?
Well, I'll tell you. Let's go there. So I've heard from a couple different sources off the record, and this, you can consider this apocryphal for the time being, at least. But I had heard that. There was a lot of feeling among 1013 people, in the corner offices, let's just say, that they really did not want to leave Vancouver. They really didn't want to move to LA. And they just were very upset that David was, really playing hardball with them. And so his contract stipulated that if they did not move to LA in the 6th season, that he would have basically the same arrangement that he had in 8. So he would be, he would do like, I guess, 8 episodes and, selected cameos in other episodes, basically the same arrangement. And there was a lot of feeling from what I've heard, from 2 different sources, mind you, unconnected sources as well, that they were just going to call his bluff. They just said, you know what, listen, it's going to cost us 3 times as much to do the show in LA. We've got a great crew here. We've got great people. We've got a great city with free atmosphere. So they were thinking about calling David's bluff. And I think that, the Kresge character, so David's off doing, playing God, which is just a really, really bad movie. I think he just, I think he could have been more successful in film. He just picked the wrong projects. He always seemed to pick the wrong projects. Anyway, so he was off doing playing God, and I think there was a definite thought, or a definite idea that let's just see how Gillian plays against other actors. And I don't think they were ever planning to cast John Piper Ferguson as a new male lead, but I think it was just like, well, let's just try this out, because they could have done this episode without him. Yeah. They could have done it with a female detective. They could have done it with no detective at all. I mean, they could have there's a number of ways they could have played this, but I think they really wanted to see how they could play her against a new actor. And, he's a cop and he's no nonsense and, he's a little bit of a dick. And, you can see the seeds for the Doggett character taking shape here. So I think that was a deliberate, intention on their part. And, we saw the same thing repeat itself in season 6 in Tithonus, with the Peyton Riddick character. So I think there was definitely a feeling like we love David. David's great. The Mulder character is great, but it's just gonna upset everything. And I think, moving to LA, I mean, let's be frank here. And it really hurt the show. I mean, the season, the ratings that season really kind of cratered. So, of course you had the direct competition from Sopranos in the second half of the season, but, be that as it may, Fox was having none of it. Fox knew that the secret to this show's success was, David and Jillian. So they were not going to mess with that formula. But I really do think that this was sort of like, well, let's see how this goes. And it was kind of like, again, like alpha testing,
Well, we'll probably return to Kresge, but one character I wanted to ask you about was Tara, because we get the thing, don't we, where they're sat at the table and, she's talking about a baby kicking and I can't wait to have more. It gives everything new meaning. Obviously presumably she doesn't know the resonance that would have for Scully, but what do you make of her? She's a character that doesn't seem to get much discussion. Like how much, I don't know, you get this with people with kids sometimes, I think, where they're a bit insensitive to people who don't have them and they talk in a certain way. And how oblivious is she to what Scully may be feeling, do you think?
Well, this is the whole subtext, the unspoken subtext of this series that I love so much. I think that was a very like catty, bitchy thing to say. And I think she's like, it's the kind of thing, particularly at that time, because, this is the late 90s and you had like a sort of a mini baby boom going on and you had, the economy was really roaring and I think there was a lot of, women who had put off family for careers and, started having kids at this time. And I just, like I said, I was there and you'd go to like schools and preschools and it was just like kids running around everywhere. So I think that, in the context of the time, I just think that was a very kind of like catty thing to say, but, and it suits her character too, because, she's like the sweet kind of fresh face, housewife type, but that's, again, it's very real. And it's the kind of shading. It's the kind of, subtext that this show put in that other shows did not. And certainly the shows that were trying to copy the X-Files never did, or at least did with any kind of grace or sophistication.
And I think it kind of, so that leads into the next scene where, Scully's mother comes for a chat when she's doing the dishes, and we get all this stuff about she's discovered that she couldn't conceive quite recently. Didn't realise how much she wanted a child until the prospect was taken away. So there's an argument about these episodes that you hear, and about Scully's character more generally, the kind of maternal turn that she takes. And the argument seems to be like the series is suggesting that women who hadn't previously wanted children were kind of missing out in some way. In other words, that Scully's kind of belatedly learning about what true womanhood is all about or something. I mean, how do you see that? I mean, I guess we started to see intimations of this from when? From Home, maybe? Scully, I never saw you as a mother before. I guess it's kind of been layered in a bit since then, hasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly has. I think that, and then I would even go back to an episode like Revelations when she just sort of has that very protective maternal attitude towards Kevin Kreider. And, there are probably other examples of this as well that are not coming to my mind immediately. So I think that, this is 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. Scully was born, I guess her character's born in 1964. She's being raised in a Catholic family before, Vatican II sort of sunk its teeth in. It's a military family. It's a Catholic family. I mean, motherhood is enshrined, motherhood is very important. It's not, the way it is now. Families were, central to everyone's life, really. So I just think that those arguments are really specious and hollow and really kind of oblivious to, to who this character is and her background. I think that kind of context is really necessary to understand this character, that she's not who she later became. Her background, which we see here, which, she's part of a Catholic military family. Motherhood is important. It really is.
And also, like she says, the fact that the prospect has now gone away, so it kind of brings it into focus, I guess.
You don't miss your water until the well runs dry. That's an old folk song.
Yeah. What about these sequences we get in this episode? Well, I mean, here we see Scully in bed, don't we? And I guess the most obvious reading is that we see a dream sequence, but the extent to which they're kind of realistic or not seems to vary a bit from case to case. So are we seeing dreams? Are we seeing flashbacks? Are we seeing recollections that are kind of filtered through Scully's perspective? I mean, how do you take all these kind of sequences?
Well, it's the X-Files, so it's a little bit of everything, you know? Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, the X-Files sort of exists in this liminal place, you know? You know, one of the things that I've discussed with you is just like how much of this is really happening and how much of it is perception and how much of it is delusion. You know, I think that's part of the magic of the show. You know, there's been a lot of shows that have covered this kind of ground before. I mean, let's face it. And, you know, just before the show was on, there was Friday the 13th, the series. I don't know if you've ever got a chance to watch that, I've
seen one episode, yeah.
Which is very, very similar to the X-Files in a lot of ways. But it took everything at face value. And I think the ambiguity that was woven into the X-Files, you know, really is another part of the secret of its success. You know, when things are taken literally and at face value, it's just not interesting. It's boring, you know, because that doesn't fit our life experience. It's that kind of ambiguity when you enter this sort of liminal twilight world where, you know, is this happening? Is it not happening? That I think really gives it the magic. So in the case of these sequences that you're referring to, I think no, they could be dreams. They could be dreams based on memories. I don't take them necessarily literally, and I wouldn't want to. So I think that it's probably a little of everything.
Yeah, and the first one, for anyone keeping score, is the one with young Dana and Bill fighting over the rabbit, isn't it? Which she later discovers covered in maggots. Yeah, and I suppose another element that's kind of difficult to reconcile with, you know, with actual logic are those phone calls, aren't they? Because we get these references to, a call actually did come in, but there's a glitch in the software or whatever. And another one comes in, doesn't it? Go to her, Melissa says. So yeah, I think what they do though is they help make Melissa a real presence in the story, given that we won't actually see her for a long time in this episode, Melinda McGrath, but we get these phone calls, we get talk about her, and we see a photograph, don't we, at one point, I think. So I like the way they kind of layered her in.
Well, it builds anticipation. You know, because you just wait, you know she's going to show up, you know, but you don't know when and you don't know how. And it reminds me in a lot of ways of Apocalypse Now, where it's the entire film. I think Brando's in it for like less than 10 minutes, but it's the entire film is kind of working up into anticipation of confronting him. So in this setting, I think that the way it's doled out bit by bit really builds up that anticipation and just like, you know, when are we going to see her? And the scene that we do see her in, I just think is so beautiful and so lyrical. And you know, and I love the way that the dreams sort of segue back into reality and Mark Snow hits those kind of like those weird polyphonic tones. It just really gives it a sense of magic, I think.
I think this episode, it's really good at not bludgeoning you over the head with stuff, you know. So, for instance, when Scully finds the picture of Emily that she asks to borrow, and, you know, we have seen the young girl in the first dream sequence, but the significance of her resemblance to Melissa is not immediately signposted, is it? And I think stuff like that's a nice touch. It kind of takes us a little time to catch up in some points of this episode. In a way that's very effective. I think a lesser show would have kind of hit you over the head with these things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, even though we do see, well, actually, I'm going to forget the sequencing here. I mean, does Scully have the dream with Melissa as a baby before we see that picture?
Yeah, in the dream, I think I at first I assumed she was dreaming about Emily. You know, it's not made clear to us that she's seeing her sister, is it? I don't think.
Well, yeah, and you know, it's funny you should mention that because you know the next time there's that very obvious dream sequence with the funeral. So I think you're right in that sense. You know, it does. You do have that kind of wiggle room, and I'll tell you something. I mean, I'm probably, or at least back then, I was kind of dim-witted, I guess. But you know, when the denouement comes in the last second of this episode, I was just floored. I'm just like, killed me.
Yeah, well, I think you can see on rewatch, you can see how they're kind of preparing you for that, can't they? There's a 60% chance it's Melissa's child, and so on. You can kind of see that the way they're kind of putting it together.
I didn't.
When you go back, I think, yeah. I was wondering about these dreams as well, though, because the second one, like you say, it's the one where she's led to the coffin, She sees the dead woman's eyes open in the coffin. Emily's father speaks and Bill's voice comes out. But I was wondering how much Scully's dreams you think are kind of influencing her here, because it seems like after that, you know, she has this dream that foregrounds the father, and it's then that she starts to investigate him. So it seems kind of un-Scully-like, doesn't it, for her to be kind of swayed by something happening in a dream. But yeah, what do you think?
You know, it's funny you should mention that, because there was the conversation that Mulder and Mama Scully had back in Ascension, you know, like, oh, I had a dream, you know, this is something that was going to happen like this, and she just thinks that's silly and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, this is really the evolution of her character, and she has such a long arc in this series that I think people don't really tend to appreciate, you know, how much her character evolved. But yeah, I just, that really works for me. And I don't know if I've ever really discussed this with you. I might have, but I strongly believe that there's a undercurrent or a suggestion throughout the series that Scully is psychic. And I think that the, you know, that power of that dream to start in investigating Mr. Sim there, I think, you know, speaks to that. But, you know, we saw that, you know, as far back as The Blessing Way. You know, that's something, yeah, but of course we see that, you know, again, throughout the series, because we have, you know, she has the visions in the 8th season, you know, of Mulder, and, you know, even up to the final season when she has that sort of psychic link with William. And, you know, this whole idea of ambiguity and double meaning, you know, when William asks, you know, Mulder, why don't you have these dreams, you know, implying that he has no sort of direct connection to William genetically, which I don't believe, by the way. But I think it's more like, well, you know, I'm not psychic, and you know, your mother is. So I think that's more what it's like.
Yeah. Well, is the suggestion that, like, the women in the Scully family, rather than just Scully herself, because Melissa and her mother at times seem to have these kind of weird insights, don't they? Like Scully's mother turns up on the scene in Ascension, like, uncannily fast, and yeah, it's interesting they didn't label that though. Yeah. Well, that to me is, like, again, like, not calling attention to it, sort of letting fans figure this out for themselves, I think is, you know, was obviously, you know, part of their intended agenda. You know, they'd always wanted to sort of leave a lot of these things like, you know, breadcrumb trails for the fans to follow. So yeah, I definitely think that the Scully women are psychic. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, now this may seem like a trivial point, but I just wanted to point out that the actor they get to play the cantankerous old guy doing the autopsy is really good, I think. Because he's, you know, when he looks chastened as well after he missed the puncture wound, I think he's really good. And I think we've seen him a couple of times before, haven't we? He's one of those familiar faces. Unruhe, he's in, isn't he? He's the guy in The Chemist or whatever it is.
Yes, and he's also the judge in Miracle Man. So.
Oh, yeah. Just one of those great actors they would find, you know?
Well, it's interesting, too, because, you know, those are sort of two psychic episodes. You know, you have the healer. And I think, just as a little aside, I always thought that the little preacher boy there in Miracle Man was an alien hybrid, because we sort of see, you know, Jeremiah Smith having those same abilities. But also, you know, in Rue, which is, you know, about psychics and in that case, you know, psychic photography and all that kind of business.
Yeah, like I say, we get this scene where, you know, the package has arrived. It's a match, a 60% match for Melissa. Scully explains to her mother what she's found. And yeah, you've briefly mentioned Mark Snow's score here, and it's particularly prominent in this scene. And, like, I'm not musically trained or anything, but his music for this episode is fabulous, isn't it? Really, really good. Yeah.
It's interesting, too, because he's sort of, you know, I love Mark Snow, and I particularly love his work in the early seasons. But there got a point in the series where he started doing less of that kind of really heavy electronic ambient stuff, and he started going more for naturalistic sounds, piano and oboe. He seemed to like clarinet a lot. I think the more naturalistic his scores got, I think they just got a little syrupy and a little maudlin towards the later seasons. But I think in this season that, you know, you have this really great synthesis of the earlier seasons, more, you know, electronic and ambient and dissonant kind of scores, and a little bit more melodic. So it really reaches its apogee in this season and in this particular episode as well.
Yes, and this whole stuff with Scully's mother's really good. So, you know, she says we're still connected to them, Deana, even after they're gone. And Sheila Larkin's always a pleasure to watch, I think. And we get the flashback stroke dream to Christmas morning one year. It's the one where the girls are given their crosses. And it's quite funny, I think, because it seems like Melissa's a bit nonplussed. But Scully likes it. And the mother says it means God will watch over them wherever they go. I suppose, arguably, it creates a continuity discrepancy with what happened before, doesn't it? Where I think Scully's mother said it was given for her 15th birthday. But again, this might be a case of Scully conflating things, or she lost a cross and was given another one. I don't know. But
well, and also the fact that she, like, you know, her mother all of a sudden has Gillian Anderson's face. So, you know, maybe we're not supposed to take this entirely. Yeah. It's more, you know, like a mood piece, kind of speaking to their upbringing and their family dynamic.
Is this the scene with Gillian Anderson's sister playing
Zoe?
The roles?
Yes. Props to Zoe. And that was I think a little stroke of genius on Bob Goodwin's part, because they were having trouble casting that character. You know, the young Scully, and he was just like, wait a minute, doesn't Gillian have like a younger sister who's that age?
Yeah.
And it was just, you know, it's just that kind of magic. But also, like, I think it really speaks to, you know, what a great producer Bob Goodwin, and he was just he had like this paterfamilias kind of, you know, energy to him that, you know, very family oriented, and I think that it really helped inspire a lot of the greatness that the show reached.
Yeah, and he is married to Sheila Larkin, of course, as well.
Of course, yeah. And now, you know, getting back to, you know, we're talking about the director, Peter Markle. He's actually married to the woman who played Karen Berquist in Melinda Kalia, I believe her name is. So he's one of those directors that really doesn't get a lot of props, but he did some great episodes, I think.
So which ones did he do? He did this one, Alpha, and how many others are we talking across the run of the...
I'm looking right now. You know, Alpha is a pretty bad episode, but it's not because it's very well directed, and, you know, I think it's just a
bit tired at that point.
Yeah, like really, werewolves, really? That's what we're doing now? Seriously? Yeah, he also did Red Rum, which is a phenomenal
That's
episode.
a good one. Yeah.
So
yeah, good stuff.
And he also did 2 Millenniums, by the way.
Okay, cool. We'll talk about this more maybe next time, but, you know, there's a bit of a clean break, it seems, in a lot of ways between part 1 and part 2, but I think the scene that most hints at what's going to happen in the second part is when they go to the clinic, don't they, and talk to Dr. Calderon, you know, and we find out Emily's part of an ongoing trial and so on. These payments were a goodwill gesture to Mrs. Sim.
Yeah, where it's obviously not being shot in La Jolla because, you know, Gillian Anderson's obviously freezing and you can see their breath. So
yeah, and it's very obviously not Gillian Anderson when they first walk across the courtyard there, is it?
Yeah, that whole sequence is it's a bit of a collage, and, you know, clearly Gerard Plunkett playing Dr. Calderon's being green screened and all that good kind of stuff, but still, it's a wonderful scene. And again, I love that dynamic between Kresge and Scully here. It's a totally different dynamic, but, you know, it really works for me. You know, it's 2 very serious, results-oriented investigators, you know, working on a case, you know, where Mulder would probably just start being a little bit more of a showboat and all that kind of thing, like we see in the next episode.
Yeah, well, he reminds me, Kresge. I mean, they're very different characters and very different actors, but, like, when we talked about Mike Millar in Tempest Fugit, but again, he's somebody who, he clearly doesn't believe this stuff, you know, it's just not completely out of his wheelhouse, but he's convinced by evidence, isn't he? He's kind of led in the correct way.
Well, he's convinced by evidence, but he's not convinced that Scully's talking to ghosts. I mean, he's just like, we're cracking this case, you know, great, fantastic. He's not like, oh my God, you must have been talking to your dead sister. You know, I don't think that even enters into his, you know, he's like, well, it's just a phone screw up. You know, again, he's like, that's not his world. He's just completely oblivious to it.
Yeah, no, it's like when Scully says about, why was the phone off the hook when he'd called you know, he's led by that kind of thing, isn't he? He's kind of open-minded to genuine evidence, yeah.
Physical evidence.
Physical evidence, that's a good term. I mean, we get the whole thing with Scully taking Emily to the car, putting her in the seat, giving her the cross, of course. And I like what this scene does, I really do, but do you feel like there's enough of a bond established between Scully and Emily across the 2-parter as a whole, in terms of, you know, meaningful character interactions?
Well, it's really tough to say because I think that, again, Scully's nascent psychic abilities, she probably senses all along what's going on here. And that she's just being sort of walked through it. But I think subconsciously she knows where she's going to end up. So I think that kind of bond, maybe on the face of it might not make as much sense, but if you do look at in the context of the sort of subtext where Scully is psychic, I think it makes a lot more sense. But even if she's starting to think that, this is Melissa's child, you're still going to get that kind of bond,
But what do you think about the choice of having Emily be this more kind of, I don't know what the word is, maybe placid girl? I mean, of course, she's gone through this horrible trauma and so on. But I don't know, does she appear fully fleshed out as a character in her own right, I guess, or could they have written her slightly differently, maybe?
Well, I'll tell you what I think. I like the way her character plays because she seems like a human alien hybrid, she seems like what she is, she's not entirely human. So her responses and her interactions are not going to work on that kind of level. I mean, objectively, she should be devastated that her mother's dead, but it almost kind of reminds me of, in a strange way, of like the Village of the Damned. The way those kids are just kind of like they just watch a lot because they don't really get how anything works. Seems very foreign to them, alien.
Right. So in terms of the Scully family, so we get that there's a Christmas party of some kind going on at that house. There's lots of Navy people around. Yeah, the presentation of the Scullys as a military family is interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's like some of the emphasis on like social rituals. It feels like something I recognise because like I've got some military people in my family, and it kind of rings true, but in a way that's not kind of really spelled out, I suppose.
Yeah, well, this I think you're sort of speaking to like kind of a formality,
Yeah, exactly.
And everybody's just a little reserved and just a little, I wouldn't necessarily say tense, but they just, they're not like a family that's just going to, sit on the couch and, have little pillow fights. And, just there's a bit of coldness, I think, in that family. And, again, I think that rings very true. It really does.
Yeah. Okay, so just moving on a little. I mean, we get the developments about Mr. Sim is found hanging in his cell, of course, and those two mysterious men who we'll find out more about in Emily. And when Scully fills Bill in on all the latest developments, this is where, I mean, to be fair, he's trying Bill, isn't he? Because he's found this photograph of Melissa from a few weeks before Emily was born. And Bill's taken it as that Scully's creating this scenario to fulfill her own dreams of having a child, and she's going to end up hurting herself. And as you kind of already said, the caricature of Bill is that he's awful. But again, like you also said, you've got to bear in mind how insane a lot of the stuff he hears must be. And I think Pat Skipper's really good, isn't he, at playing a very forthright character, but tempering him with a bit of humanity, I think. Yeah,
I think if you had another actor in that role, I don't think it would work nearly as well. And again, it's the magic, it's just great casting. I mean, what a coup to find, Sheila Larkin to play Mama Scully, I mean, what a coup, just you had this actress in house who looked like Gillian Anderson's mother,
Yeah.
They're the same height, the same body type. Just amazing, it's brilliant.
I wonder why we never see Bill again then. I wonder if they're just going to get him out to LA or, I don't know.
Well, again, I think since they were so sensitive to the sort of instant feedback they were getting, since, you had a lot of fans just like,
oh yeah,
not really dig what was going on. But also you had like the 6th season where like, it's not, everything is an event. Everything is a novelty episode. I mean, even the mythology episodes are novelty versions of, mythology. You know what I mean? They're all, everything is a Darren Morgan episode in some regard or another, even if it exists in the context of the series. It's just everything is an event episode. I don't think you would really have that kind of interplay in those kind of shows.
It's interesting, isn't it, that all the stuff about Scully applying to adopt Emily happens off screen, and it seems like there can't have been much time for her to have done that, and it seems like it's all happening very quickly as well, but I guess we just kind of got to go with that. But it does give us that great scene where she talks about how she's questioned her priorities since her illness, doesn't it? That she was so afraid of death and dying that connection seemed like a bad thing, but she doesn't feel that anymore. So it's very cathartic in some ways, but is the problem with it the fact that I guess we know ultimately on some level that we're not going to get beyond this two-parter and have Emily be on the scene, are we? But does that detract from it?
Well, I mean, what are you going to do? What else are you going to do? I mean, look at happen in the ninth season when Scully's, got to arrange for babysitters and stuff. You can't really have that going on in the series, particularly at this point when it's still like young and sexy and on the go, and you really can't have her being bogged down with like having to change. Well, she's a little, I mean, he's a little old for nappies, but
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a problem with this episode at all. I wonder if a later show, a show that had come along a few years later, might have attempted it though. When everyone's a bit more serialized and things, but.
Well, look at how compressed the storytelling is in the episode, particularly in the mythology arc. The X-Files really crammed a lot of information into these episodes, and now everything is kind of decompressed and would be spread out, and the amount of information and events that we see in this two-parter, today would be 4 parts. You would just play that out. More decompressed. And I don't know if that necessarily helps it or hurts it, but it's just the way storytelling has changed.
Yeah, I think so. And we get the flashback or dream or whatever, finally, with Melinda McGrath. And like you say, it is powerful, where they talk about Scully's future. Just before she joins the FBI, I think. Med school used to feel right, but now it's the FBI that feels like the right thing to do. And Melissa basically says, don't mistake the path you're on for what's really important, the people you're going to meet as you go along the way. And I don't know, how much like credence do you think we're supposed to give to what Melissa says here? Like, do you think we're supposed to treat her like this oracle that's kind of turned up and she's speaking the truth, or what?
Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, it's that sort of uncertainty that I think gives it a lot of power. I mean, this could just be a dream that Scully's having, and she's just prefiguring her own interactions with Mulder. So, I mean, it could go either way, but I just think it's a very beautiful and lyrical scene, and I think it really plays a lot to how well these two actresses played off each other. And I'll be, it's really a damn shame that we didn't see more of this character in the series,
Yeah. And I like the moment when Scully says, like, you sound like a greeting card. It kind of punctures the seriousness of it. And I mean, I know Scully's hair is styled differently. I don't think Gillian Anderson really looks like Scully circa season 1, but the performance is what carries it up, of course.
It's not nearly as bad as the hypnosis scene in Closure. When Mulder has got that hairstyle.
Oh, yeah.
That's really funny.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. All right, so Christmas Day has come, and present from Charles Scully, which is it's always nice when he's mentioned, I think. And then the courier turns up for Scully with the test results. So Scully is Emily's mother, is how we end this episode. And like we said, it's kind of cleverly constructed, isn't it? And surprising and powerful, as you said. And as you've already said, it kind of knocked you for 6 the first time you saw it. What do you think the reaction was like more generally? Do you think fans at the time were were on board with this or not? Online fans?
Well, I got to tell you, I had really checked out looking at the X-Files message boards at this point in time because, everything had just gotten so toxic.
It's funny to me that it happened so early, or kind of curious, I should say.
Well, it's the internet. I mean, the internet really has a tremendous distorting effect, and people are hiding behind fake names and fake identities, and they can say whatever they want, and the ids really come out of the dungeon. So I don't remember specifically how that revelation was received, but I just do remember that there was a lot of kind of a little bit of groaning and moaning, and there was sort of a sense that in this two-parter that, Scully was really just being put through the ringer, but that's drama. If your characters aren't put through the ringer, then it's boring as hell. You've got to have characters suffer and be put through tests and trials, or that's not drama, Well,
I suppose it becomes kind of self-perpetuating, doesn't it? When you get through like dozens and dozens of episodes, past 100 episodes by this point, and you also discover that your actress is so good at doing it as well as the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. You really want to go back to that wellspring, because it works.
Right, so let's have a quick look at what some of our listeners said on the mailbag, starting with the main man, Tony Black, who said, "It's not bad. It's better than Emily, but Christmas Carol at least does try and work as an almost standalone seasonal mystery and character piece for Scully. The teaser is as haunting as the similar opening to Beyond the Sea, and while at times the narrative plods, part of me likes the fact that they gave this the space for a two-parter instead of cramming it all into one. It just isn't particularly a zinger, anything with a twinkle, or anything I'd choose to often revisit. I mean, I just don't feel like it does plod, to be fair. I think it gives Scully some space, and I think that's a good thing."
I can't be objective about this episode, so don't ask me.
Right. Andrew Levitt said, "This is a great exploration of Scully and her desires through the lens of Dickens' A Christmas Carol. That Scully refuses to get Mulder involved and tries to cope with this on her own makes it a stronger episode. She almost comes across as Mulder-like in her persistence with this case. Detective Kresge is a great foil for her here. It's also a great insight into Scully's alienation from her family, even so close to the cancer arc when they became important to her. This conveys how far she has changed since she first joined Mulder on the X-Files. A wonderful episode only marred by being joined to Emily and being part of a season full of superior episodes." Well, I suppose that last part is a nice problem to have, isn't it?
Yeah, we should all be so lucky.
Yeah. Annie Aflori says, "I've always loved Scully-centric episodes. In Christmas Carol, Scully attempts to gain some understanding and control over her life and the fallout of her abduction by helping Emily. It also continues the long-standing tradition of Scully seeing or hearing ghosts that she claims she doesn't believe in. It's a cool idea for the skeptic of the show." And Sarah Ford says, finally, "I actually really love this episode. I love seeing the Scully family. I love the phone call. I love the ideas. I feel like this is a great episode that looks at women and motherhood. We're looking at moms, sisters, adopted moms and daughters, and we're looking at male violations of this, murder, forced births, maybe, over-harvesting, etc. I feel like this had so much potential to go somewhere, and Emily just didn't stick the landing. I feel like if the second half had been stronger, this would be a very beloved two-parter." Well, Chris, I think that's something we'll have to discuss on the next episode, isn't it?
The gauntlet has been thrown.
Before we do go, do you want to point anyone anywhere online, like the blog or anything else, social media?
I hopefully by the time this airs, my new book should be out. It's called He Will Live Up in the Sky.
Oh, nice.
And it will be available on Amazon and hopefully other sellers by this time. And I think that anybody who's an X-Files fan is going to really like it because very, very much inspiration and influence shown, even though I take things in a much different direction. But I think that if you're an X-Files fan, you will like this book very, very much.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look at that. Nice. Right, in the meantime, you can find us at the Xcast in all the usual places. So on Twitter, for instance, at the X_cast. But that's all for this episode, listeners. Until next time, always remember, trust no one.
The Xcast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and hosted by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated team of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find the show on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, or inside our group, the X-Files Basement, an Xcast podcast fan group, plus on Instagram by typing in the XFcast. If you're a fan of the show, why not support us on Patreon? Exclusive bonus episodes, early access to new episodes, plus become part of our Xcast community in the Patreon department. To see our monthly subscription options, just head to patreon.com/the Xcast. That's patreon.com/the Xcast. We'd love to see you join our Patreon community. We're also part of the We Made This podcast network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and We Made This on Facebook. You can find a range of shows on TV, film, music and popular culture in general on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.